last time we ended at the 21 demands, right?
We did.
Yes.
Yeah. So after the 21 demands, Japan was in Russia during the Russian Civil War. It wasn't. The 21 demands happened in 1917. The Russian Civil War happened after the Treaty of Versailles and all that. And the Russian Civil War was basically Russia had the Communist Party in charge, right? The Bolsheviks, led by Lenin, and they were pretty unstable because they were a new party, they were a new regime. So the Allies, the Democratic Allies, sent their army inside to help the democratic powers in Russia fight communists. They wanted Russia to remain a democratic country. And so there were two groups of people. There were the whites, also known as the Allies, the democracy power, and there were the reds, who were the communist power, the Bolsheviks. Japan, according to this battle, Japan was to send 7,500 soldiers into Russia to fight, to help the to help the whites fight. However, Japan did not send 7,500; they sent 70,000. Why do you think they sent 70,000?
Oh,
To test their army.
Well, maybe test their army, maybe to train.
to take over Russia. Probably. Yes.
Yeah, to take over key parts of Russia. And so, if you look at it, their main target is Siberia. Siberia is here, and that's the part where Japan was particularly involved in. The West, meaning USA, France, and Britain, helped fight on the Western Front. Japan sent their soldiers on the Eastern Front. And that's particularly important because Japan's interest lies really in Siberia or in the parts connected to Korea and the Northeast Asia. So, the whites retreat in 1920. The white side lost, meaning the democratic side of the Russian Civil War lost, and they retreated. But Japan decides to stay. Japan decides to stay even after 1920 and fight. In 1922, Japan finally withdrew, but this was seen as a humiliation at home. Because before this, Japan beat China, Japan beat Russia, and now Japan participates in the Russian Civil War and they lose. So here's another picture of Siberia, where they were participating in Eastern Siberia in the Far East.
Oh,
Now, even after the Russian Civil War, though, Japan continued to expand. Japan expanded. If you look here, here's Korea, Dalian, there's Andong, Mukden. So Japan's empire continued to spread. And at that time, the agreed spheres of influence was that Japan was to have control over this area, while the British had control of this part. Japanese had control of this part, parts of Taiwan. French had control of Indochina, which is also Vietnam today. Russia had different spots, because once again the Germans were late to the imperialism race. The Portuguese also had spots. But essentially, the Japanese had interest in Russia, and that's why they had to continue fighting. They fought with the Russians there. Now, Japan played a role in the Treaty of Versailles. The Treaty of Versailles, according to the Japanese, was a mutilated victory. So the Japanese won in World War I, but they saw that as kind of like not fair. It led to the annexation of Shandong, and Shandong province, as you know, is where modern Qingdao is today. If you look at the map here, Jenny, can you turn the camera? Just please, just turn it toward me. Look at Shandong. It's this little part sticking here. This area, the Shandong Peninsula. And that's the part where Japan wanted.
including Port Arthur.
Including Port Arthur, yes. That's the Port Arthur would be the Liaodong Peninsula. So Japan, the Shandong previously was owned by the Germans. The Germans had control over it, but then the Japanese took it over. Of course, who did not like this?
Russia.
Who would protest?
China.
China, right? It's like, okay, the Germans occupied Shandong. We fought World War I. The Germans lost. Shouldn't the Chinese get it back? Because China participated in World War I too. China sent 100,000 people over to the trenches in France to help dig. And so China was like, how come you're giving it to Japan and not us? And so that led to the Chinese not liking it a lot. Racial equality. The Japanese also wanted a clause on racial equality in the Treaty of Versailles, but they did not get it. Particularly, some countries did not want them to be seen as equals. May 4th movement happened as a result of that. The May 4th movement was a cultural movement where there was mass protesting across China on the annexation of Shandong. And however, on the other hand, there were some benefits to Japan that there was an economic gain because the Germans were out of the picture. Most of the European countries in Europe were weakened because of World War I, and so Japan had economic autonomy over Asia, and no one was really competing with them in that region, which led to an economic boom in Japan. So on one hand, Japan did not get they got Shandong, they did not get the racial equality clause, but it did give them economic benefits, and they also got more territory. So here are some pictures of the May 4th movement, and here you see people protesting in China. May 4th movement again.
So is it cultural movement of Chinese to Japanese annexation of Shandong?
Exactly. Not a culture, more like a protest. But there was also a cultural movement that comes with that as well, and we'll look at that when we study China. In that, the Chinese felt that there was a need to strengthen their country, and there was very strong anti-Japanese feelings as a result of that, and that was a culture at that time as well. But we'll look at that in more detail later. Washington Naval Conference. And we studied this earlier in the League of Nations. The Washington Naval Conference occurred where there were representatives from America, Britain, China, Japan, France, Netherlands, Belgium, Italy, and Portugal. And they agreed on a couple of things. The Four-Power Pact. And I want to talk about how these impacted Japan, all right? The Four-Power Pact basically broke the Anglo-Japanese alliance. Because the alliance between the English and the Japanese was between two countries, they made it a Four-Power Pact which included two other countries, and so the Anglo-Japanese alliance was broken as a result. So the Japanese lost an ally. The Five-Power Pact set the ratio for boats, and the ratio is the following.
553 1.75.
553 1.75.
553 1.67, I think. 67 and 1.67 for which countries?
U.S., Britain, Japan.
U.S., Britain, Japan. Who's the last two?
France and Italy.
France and Italy. Good. Was this in your readings?
Yes.
Is that 1.67?
1.67. That was the Five-Power Treaty. Five-Power Pact. And the last one was Nine-Power Pact, which had all the countries respect China's sovereignty, meaning all the countries are not to encroach upon China anymore. They're not supposed to take stuff from China anymore. The first two were good for Japan. The Four-Power Pact was good for Japan because, number one, it gave Japan security from a Western attack. So Japan does not have to fear an attack from the West anymore. If anyone attacks them, the other three powers will step in to protect Japan. Number two, the Five-Power Pact was beneficial to Japan because it limited American expansion. America could not get any bigger in their navy, and because Japan can't keep up, and so if America can't expand anymore, and Japan can pretty much keep up with America in a pretty decent ratio. Otherwise, America can build a lot of boats, and Japan can never catch up. So setting a ratio was good for Japan in that sense. And because of that, because of the 5 power pact, the relationship between America and Japan improved a little bit. The 9 power pact was problematic for Japan. Why? Why would the 9 power pact be problematic for Japan?
Pragmatic.
China.
Problematic.
But-
What about China? Yeah, they can't attack China. And so that was a problem. The liberal 1920s. With that, Japan entered a period called the liberal 1920s, where Japan entered a cultural and economic change, a period of cultural and economic change. It was interesting because it was during this time period where Japan went from a country of democracy into a country with militarism. There were a couple of factors that drove this. First of all, as a result of World War I, Japan became rich. Japan had a lot of money, and so they lent money to Chinese warlords, meaning people in China, warlords in China who were doing things for Japan. In Northeast China, there was a Zhang Zhuoling and Zhang Xueliang, two major father and son. They were major warlords, but they cooperated with the Japanese. The Japanese lent money to them. However, that was considered as a poor investment. The loans were a poor investment because they never got their money back. So they would pay people to cause trouble in China, warlords to cause disunity in China, but they never got that money back. So Japan also entered a period where they started printing money. So business was good right after World War I, but like any boom, there is a bust. Any boom, there is a period of settling down. So at some point, they had to start printing money. When you print money, it leads to inflation. We talked about what inflation is before. So there were rice riots. As a result of because of that, rice became very expensive. Money became something that only the rich had, and so people protested on saying that they want some rice, and in reality, money was in the hands of the rich. The rich people were rich, the poor were really poor in Japan. And so, but at the same time, though, there was a culture at that time. The culture in the 1920s embraced Western culture, such as music, fashion, architecture, sports. Japan embraced those Western elements during that time. So that was what Japan was like in the 1920s. Hirohito became the new emperor during that time. In 1926, he became the new emperor. Hirohito also means Showa. Showa stands for bright peace. And he assigns his first prime minister, Hara Takashi. And Hara Takashi promoted peace. And Hara, he led Japan into the League of Nations. He also put Japan as